Hi there, I'm Brian Schiffman, the President and CEO of the Vaughan Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome all our viewers at home through the business community who are tuning in for our third virtual town hall, this one from our elected representatives from Thornhill. I want to thank them all for being here. I'm going to formally introduce each of you shortly. In the two previous sessions we've conducted, I think it's worth reiterating a couple points we heard because they may provide some reassurance to you at home if you didn't see the statement. One of the things we heard from MP Sabara was that the threshold for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy in March had dropped in terms of the amount of revenue that you had to show a loss, went from 30% to 15%. We pretty much got that real time. So I think that provided some reassurance and clarity for our members at home. We also heard last week from Minister Lecce, the Education Minister, pretty much real time again, that the province does have a plan for ensuring all grade 12 students do graduate. And I know, although it's not a particularly business issue, it certainly affects all our members at home who have kids, and that knowing that your kids will graduate and there is a plan to get them to college or university. The mayor in particular, you've been very gracious to join us the 2 previous weeks. One of the things that you said in last week's segment that a few of my members commented on was the point about how if you think we're in bad shape now, can you imagine what it would be like if we didn't have such high-functioning government that's working together so well at all levels of government to make things better? And I wanted to give you credit for that because ultimately all 3 levels are working together, and this is an unbelievably challenging time for everyone. And as I've often said to our members, we're in this together, but we're all facing a little bit different circumstances in our own personal lives at home, at work. So I've appreciated the candor from the previous few weeks and the themes that we're hearing. We've talked to over 450 of our members personally. Is there are a lot of concern about just the noise out there? How do I access certain programs? Or I don't qualify for certain programs. When will those programs be released? Rent's a good one, rent support. And questions like, I still see people out in the community using playgrounds, and I want to flatten the curve faster. What can be done? So within those themes, I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers and ask that I'll give you specific questions. You will have a 5-minute introduction each, and I ask you to talk about what your level of government is doing to support business, and then I'll come back and ask you specific questions, ask you to keep your answers to about 2 minutes each, just so we can cover a lot of ground. As a reminder to those at home, you should come to the vaughnchamber.ca website. Often you go to the COVID-19 business resources page. You can get it off the homepage at the top. You click that. All the support from all levels of government are on that page in pretty much real time. So that way you're not searching the internet, newest CRA directive as an example. Okay, so we have Honorable Peter Kent, MP from Thornhill. Thank you for joining us. We have Gila Marto, MPP from Thornhill, also the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Francophone Affairs. Thank you for joining us. And Honourable Mayor Maurizio Bevilacqua, City of Vaughan, thank you for coming back again, joining us for the 3rd time. We appreciate it. Okay, so I'm gonna go to MP Kent for any opening statements you'd like to give.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian. This is an important service to the business community, certainly in Vaughan and across York Region and beyond. Many of your members have contacted my office and the office of other members of Parliament in and around Vaughan with the multitude of questions that some of them delivered with no little amount of concern and anxiety. At the moment, there are 6 major federal government emergency funding programs, which some of them more than others relate directly to the interests and concerns of your members. Not all of these programs, of these 6 programs, one of them just announced today for students, $9 billion for the Canadian Emergency Student Fund, which again will reflect and interact with some of your members, although not the way the emergency wage subsidy will, for example. Not all of these programs have been activated by federal legislation. And even those, the CERB, which came into effect first, is changing by the day. So it's really important that for employees on the SERB side and for employers on the CEWS side, the CEWS side, constantly, almost daily, go into the federal government websites, the federal government of Canada website, the Finance Department website, and the Canada Revenue Agency website to catch up on some of the updates, some of the modifications, and a lot of the expansion of these different programs. As your members know, as you know, as Gila and Maurizio know very well, there are a lot of gaps. There are unintended consequences for folks that don't quite fit into some of these, or who might not appear to fit into some of these programs initially. But the government is working. We on the official opposition have been encouraging government to meet more often, to raise and address some of these questions. But the federal government has worked hard, and individual ministers and departments are responding to questions from all parties, from all members, and are trying to keep up with the inquiries as to what works and how quickly this emergency funding. Some of the proposals are easy to make, but they're much more difficult to actually activate and roll out and deliver those funds in what is an emergency situation. One final word, and that's with regards to constant updating of the detail of these various programs. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has done a magnificent job in both, along with the opposition parties, encouraging the federal government to improve and expand and increase some of these emergency funding programs. But also the CFIB website is a great repository of what has been accomplished and what they would urge, and what certainly some of the members of the Vaughan Chamber, I am sure, would urge the federal government to consider as improvements or tweaks of some of these programs.
Thank you very much for that. And yes, we agree with many of the points being put forward by CFIB. So we'll turn to MPP Marto.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on, Brian, and so nice to be here with Peter and Maurizio, even though it's in the virtual sphere of things. I worked as an optometrist throughout the SARS epidemic. I had to wear a mask and we had to follow safety protocols, and it was difficult. So I guess I can say I have a bit of firsthand knowledge, but this is much more serious and much more difficult than SARS. I think most people not in the health stream of industries didn't really feel SARS that much. This is a pandemic. It's across the world. Every country is affected. Every community is affected. And I think we're very lucky to be in one of the best provinces and one of the best countries. And sometimes it's tough times like this that make you appreciate the different types of governments that we have, the different programs that we have, the different ministries, and everybody working together. And I think that that's really the key message, is that the spirit of Ontario togetherness that we're seeing is really, I think it gives us all a lot of motivation to keep looking forward. We have the jobs and economic recovery team that's in place, because it's not enough just to put the safety measures in the state of emergency that we put in place and then we had to extend it. It's not enough to just try to keep everybody isolated, to flatten the curve, to provide the health care, to make sure that the personal protection equipment is there for all of our frontline workers. We also have to look to the future and ensure that we can presently keep our businesses and our employees, safe during the time being, but ensure that they do have jobs to go back to and people do have businesses at the end of this. So I think that that's what the Vaughan Chamber of Commerce is probably most concerned about, is keeping their members able to cope through this pandemic. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of the business leaders, and whether small, medium, or large business leaders in Vaughan, whether they're members of the Vaughan Chamber of Commerce or not. I'm very interested in hearing their suggestions for how they're going to be able to adjust their business model to continue to operate once, if they're not an essential business yet. We're expecting to see stages of openings for different types of businesses, that we want to ensure that people are prepared to have the eventual opening of their business, not just business as usual, the way things were in 2019, but going forward 2020, and who knows, maybe even 2021, how they're going to adjust their business model. And I think that they can't just assume that the government is going to have all the best ideas. We know that some of the great ideas come from our community members, and many of those are in Vaughan. So I really do look forward to hearing from them. I'm going to give my email address for my office is gila.martow, M-A-R-T-O-W, at pc.ola.org. I know a lot of you message me on Facebook and other social media platforms. I can't actually work through those platforms. We usually end up directing them to the office information. But I'm so happy to hear from you and hear how you're doing. I do enjoy sort of seeing people in the virtual world and hear some of their little suggestions of how they're coping. I know that it gives people a little bit of motivation when they see other people doing things right. And we don't want to have sort of the negative, sort of the snitch line kind of atmosphere. We want to have the positive atmosphere. Peter and I worked with Councillor Alan Sheffman from Maurizio's team. We put together a newsletter for Easter and Passover, asking people to self-isolate and to not travel between countries, between provinces, and between cities, and even between homes. Sandra Racco, who's also, actually she's my councillor, also from Maurizio's team, is putting out fantastic updates about what the City of Vaughan is doing to ensure that people have the information that they need and are staying safe and staying isolated and understanding the rules. And I think that that's the key. The key is communication, working together, all the different levels of government. There's no red team, green team, or orange team, or or blue team on this pandemic. We're all working together, but we also want to have the right messaging getting through that people can understand. And I sometimes have to say to people that messaging isn't for one demographic. We have to adjust the messaging so that everybody can understand what's going on. Oftentimes they have to email one of their representatives, and they don't always understand the different services and the different programs, the different levels of government. So we're often working together, not to just say, that's a federal program, but here's the basic information, here's the links. If you have any issues, though, we might have to communicate with MP Kent's office, or we might have to direct you there if it's something a little too tricky for us to give you the information on. So again, we have the Spirit of Ontario. I'm going to very quickly highlight a couple of businesses. We have the Last Straw Distillery in Vaughan, and they obviously are a distillery working with alcohol, and they adjusted to make hand sanitizer. And they right away flagged for our team that they were forced to charge an alcohol tax because they work with alcohol products. We sent the message to the ministry, and fairly quickly the ministry made that adjustment that if distilleries and breweries are going to make hand sanitizer for all of us, then they shouldn't be charging the tax for alcohol. And the other local business that I visited just remotely outside was Exceed Robotics, which is a school at the Toys R Us Plaza on Steeles near Hilda. And they adjusted their 3D print shop to make the bands for the top of the head shields for PPE, the protective equipment for our frontline healthcare workers. So again, we see people getting together, coming up with great ideas, communicating to us, but even better, going to ontario.ca/Ontario Together to give in their ideas, their proposals, even for procurement of PPE, but also to volunteer. So again, I'm glad to participate. I look forward to hearing people's questions, people's concerns, and yes, even their suggestions going forward in this pandemic. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much. And, I appreciate you giving your email, because I know a lot of our members will reach out, and they have. And also giving a shout out to so many great businesses. You named two there that are really remaining positive and converting manufacturing to support PPE and other aspects to support frontline workers is great. So at that point, I'll turn now to our Mayor, Maurizio Bevilacqua.
Thank you so much, Brian, Peter. It's always a pleasure to see both of you. And COVID-19 has really united governance, if you will, in our country, in our city, in our province. I think that the Team Canada approach has worked exceptionally well for the people. I do want to say, though, that Brian, I want to really thank you so much for doing these town hall meetings. They really speak to the fact that when adversity strikes one of us, it strikes us all, and we need to be united in a way that speaks to, I think, the greatness of humanity. When people need each other or one another, they pull together, and governments have done that, businesses have done that. There's the businesses that have retooled, and Gila correctly pointed out a number of them. But there are also the businesses that are giving to hospitals during these difficult times. And I think of PAC Construction for Louis, who's making masks, and Ines de Santos creating all sorts of PPEs for hospitals. This is what community building is truly all about. So on one hand now, let me speak to you about something. First of all, there's the health and well-being of people. Right? That's very, very important. Then we have the business, obviously, and then there's the governance. And then there's something that I use in decision-making called bringing the future to the present. In other words, scenario building that allows you to think about what future conditions may be like, and what we collectively as governments and businesses need to do to make sure that we are ready for that moment, and or what measures should we put in place to make that future that we're imagining real. And so I must say that both the federal and provincial government, the infusion of funding into the system, the investments that they are making in people and businesses is something to take note of. Imagine these are two governments that are facing ballooning debts, they're facing high deficits, and yet they realized that at this point in time in the history of our country and our province, we need to inject funding into the economy. And I'll tell you why that's very important, because coming out of this, imagine if they didn't, type of situation we would be in. But in their wisdom, I think that they decided to make the investments so that when the recovery takes place, and it will, history teaches us that recoveries do occur. In psychological terms, desolation is always followed by consolation at one point in time. And so the pickup, I think, will be faster. Having said that, and I keep reiterating this because I think it's important, because it's a mindset that we have to have, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take a few years to get through, and it's going to require a lot of patience. It's going to require a lot of pivoting, as we witnessed already by businesses. I'll tell you where I take a little bit of comfort. I take a bit of comfort in knowing that my city and our city of Vaughan, prior to this COVID outbreak, was growing at a rate of 4%. Unemployment was 4.2%. So the entrepreneurial spirit is very much part of our city. 12,000 businesses create over 220,000 jobs, punching way above our weight. The reason why I think this is important in the recovery phase is because within our DNA lies this spirit of entrepreneurship, of our ability to risk, to innovate, to do all the things required to bring about economic growth. And last night, I delivered a speech in council about assessing what is going on in our city. What is the economic state as it relates to government itself, municipal government. And during the first quarter of 2020, the city issued 658 permits valued over 128 million. And when you average it over the previous years, what you find is an uptake of 70%. So the number of permits received to date are up 70% compared to the average number of permits over the last 3 years. Why is that important? Is because even though we're going through COVID-19, these type of numbers, to me, are indicators of the confidence that the business community has in our city. These are substantial investments. And not only does the market have confidence in us, I mean, look at what we're doing at Mackenzie Vaughan Hospital. That hospital, and I remember speaking to the premier about it, as well as Gila, was very important for us to continue to build that hospital. Why? Because 1,800 jobs will be created as a result. Because jobs now are being created as well as the building, as the hospital is being built. These are decisions that governments are making that speak to the fact that we want to be an asset in the recovery. So we've taken measures. Like I can tell you, if we look back, if we rewind the clock a little bit, we were the first city, I should say, in the province of Ontario to declare a state of emergency. 6 weeks prior to the World Health Organization's declaring COVID-19 as a global pandemic, we were already on it. We had opened up our emergency operations center. So we were ready. When you look at the measures we had to take to contain the virus, for example, closing down amenities within the parks, we moved quickly on that. We closed down our public facilities very quickly, because we understand that this is a global pandemic and we are an international city. And we have to be very conscious of that. And then after we dealt with the health of our citizens, we also simultaneously introduced, as you know, Brian, a package for businesses, which the chamber obviously also contributed insight into. And so it has to be done very methodically. We have to run on parallel lines, and we have to make sure that we're providing also a sense of confidence to the citizens that we represent. So when we early on declared a state of emergency, and when we opened up our emergency operations center, and when we were taking leads in various measures, people's confidence has grown, and they recognize that we're on top of this COVID-19, and that's extremely important. Of course, the tax measures that we took about tax relief in the sense of elimination of late fees and not increasing the water charges and fees. It's cost us the whole package is around $12 million, and for a government like the municipal government, that is a substantial reduction, and it helps, of course, the citizens deal with it. So I think that even though this town hall is all about business, the reality is that businesses do not exist in isolation. They still need governments to work. They still need the healthcare system to work. And this is what I think all three levels of government are trying to achieve that balance between obviously the healthcare, the economy, and achieve it in a governance framework that treats people well.
Agreed. Okay, so I'm going to go right into some of the questions that we received, and I think people are looking for any clarity you can provide on these programs, and reassurance would be helpful. And if you can try and keep your answers to about 2 minutes. So it won't surprise you that we're going to focus in on rent relief because that's a huge issue that our members have been pushing on in the chamber network. And we were Pleased to see the Prime Minister announce last week that the federal government and the provinces would work together to provide commercial rent relief to small to medium enterprises across Ontario. So MP Kent, I put it to you, and then we're going to go to MPP Marto. What has to happen to get this rent relief in place, and when do you think we can look forward to that?
Well, yeah, those are two big questions. First of all, the legislation has to be passed, and then the negotiations between the federal government and each of the provinces need to be negotiated. The plans have to be developed to make the delivery of the funding appropriate and transparent. We don't have the details yet. I'm sure that Gila's colleagues at Queen's Park are working with the federal government on the development of exactly how the rent relief will be rolled out and when. And that's part of the problem, is the delivery time of the emergency funding. But I mean, all parties are definitely working on this now, and I mean, we hope to see that money moving very soon, because we've received, certainly for many companies that operate on narrow margins, they can't afford to wait a month, let alone the number of weeks that they're now, in some cases, already in default.
Yeah, well, I absolutely. I mean, the issue is liquidity and business looking for anything that helps in that regard, and obviously rent relief does. Clearly in Ontario, this is a provincial issue, and then working through with the federal government. So MPP Marto, just any comment on when we might get more details on this very important issue?
Well, we're hearing from a lot of people, both renters and the tenants alike, from residential and commercial in Thornhill. And our team's been, trying to offer some support and some advice also while we're waiting for sort of legislation to pass. Part of it is that we're hearing from a lot of people, whether it's commercial or residential, that people were already behind on their rent before this pandemic hit. So what I would ask people is to ensure that they can at least, do their best to negotiate with their landlord, whether it's commercial or residential. We're happy to sort of offer a bit of advice, but really, I think the landlords it has to be understood that they're also business people. They need the rent to pay their mortgages and to pay their expenses. And I'm sure then they're looking to all levels of government to help with some of their expenses. They're paying municipal taxes, they're paying school taxes, they're paying their income taxes as well. So I think that everybody has to be fairly reasonable and find that compromise. It can't be that people are getting wage subsidies and not passing some of that on to the landlord. And we're hearing that a lot of landlords have negotiated 50% rent for now, but the rest of the rent will be owed later. They don't want people to sort of exacerbate the recovery by having a huge debt on their rent. And then the landlords need enough money to keep them going in the meantime. So I think that it's one of those issues that's multifactorial, all levels of government. The discussions are happening, but in the meantime, people should do what they can to negotiate a fair deal for themselves and the other party going forward.
Okay. Now, Mr. Mayor, I saw the announcement from the City of Vaughan this morning, which some businesses were very much welcoming, about the city's plans for tenants of the city that are not-for-profits. You're deferring rent.
Yes.
So I think that's very promising. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that. And just to loop that into another question, I know the City of Ottawa has gone a little further as well. They do a property tax hardship deferral program, has to do with rent relief for small business. So it's a two-part question. If you could tell us about what you did implement and if there are any plans to expand it.
Well, I think you've covered the rental issue in reference to nonprofit organizations, which is very close to our level of government. If I may, Brian, if I can take you back to the town hall, I think that we had with MP Sorbara and Associate Minister Tobolo, I think at one point a rental program was priced or costed out, I should say, and I thought I heard a figure of $50 billion to enact it, which is a substantial amount of money. As mayor of the city, one of the things that, above and beyond the measures that we have taken that you're aware of and already spoke about, I've been also actually working the phones and speaking to some of the landlords, the large landlords here in our city, and I don't have I can't impose their behavior. I can't create that for them, but I can actually have a conversation, which I think the conversation is extremely important. And to sit down and say that our city is going through what it's going through, and I think that it's important as citizens of the city to help each other out, because it's not just going to be government, although government's been a major player. It's also going to be some people who do have the revenue to help out other people. And by that, I mean, nobody benefits from businesses shutting down, and not even the landlord benefits because he won't have anybody renting from him or her. And so it's a conversation that I've had with a number of them. And I must say that in some cases, I've been very impressed by the manner in which the business community, the landlords, are actually reflecting measures taken by government, like the 90 days, the 90 days relief and deferral. They understand that if they don't inject also funding into their own business, that ultimately they will not benefit. So while as a government we can take some measures, and we can, given what the powers that we have, and we have done that. But I do think that there's also a role for the private sector to help the private sector as well, because look, business people understand one thing, the balance sheet, right? And they also understand the government's balance sheets, because Eli and Peter, you probably remember when we were going through major deficits and major debts, right? People were complaining about them, right? I mean, let's have a frank conversation. And so what we need to do is to use a balanced approach. We inject money into the system to keep it going, and landlords and other people have to do that in the same way, because that's how it works. There is look, in a marathon, there are no shortcuts. If people think that we're going to get out of this like toot sweet tomorrow, it's not going to happen. So you have to reorient your business, your human resources development. You've got to reorient everything, as we have done also in government as well. So your original question was also about the city of Ottawa, if I'm not mistaken. We're
right.
using a different approach. Look, the reality of government is you need revenue stream. We can't run a deficit as a municipal government. Everybody knows that. Can't do that, which means that I have to secure for the city of Vaughan residents, I have to secure a revenue stream, which means that my focus is on helping those who need it most. Not a universal blanket statement of saying, let's defer for everybody. No, because the vast majority of the residents and businesses in the city of Vaughan can, in fact, afford, let's say, their taxes, right? So let them pay it, because if deferral does not mean an elimination. Deferral means that you're going to be paid somewhere down the road. And so we have to be frank with people. And that's why I went with to eliminate the late charges and the late fees associated with any late payment of municipal taxes. And that can be postponed from even when it gets to June 1st, we can continue to postpone it. But people understand that government needs funding also to work, because at the end of the day, even small business, you need water, you need garbage pickup, you need all these services that government provide. And quite frankly, municipalities that are deferring payments and reducing revenue stream may potentially find themselves in a tight fiscal situation, because they won't have the revenue to provide the services that are required by small businesses.
No, I appreciate you going. I appreciate you going into the thinking behind it. It's certainly a challenging issue And keep in mind, like what I'm doing is I'm echoing what we're hearing from our businesses, but that's fair. Now, I wanted to turn to MP Kent, just because in terms of just to try and get through a lot of topics. I'm going to stay with you for a few minutes because I want to talk about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Okay.
Sure.
Um,
Could I just add a quick postscript to the emergency rental program, which also, I mean, it's a multi-layered set of negotiations because we have the major landlords that the mayor referred to. We have property management companies, which are another layer, which deal with the individual, in many cases, rental contracts. And there needs to be a means to work out the delivery of these funds to landlords. And the Act will say specifically that landlords to receive these funds are expected to substantially reduce those rents and be able to account for those reductions of rent at every level. But for those companies, for those businesses that are in emergency situations today with either overdue rent, which Gila referred to, or impending payments, which they may not be able to meet, they should look at the emergency business account, that $40,000 on offer, with 25% of it to be forgiven as a means of bridging that time until the rent program, the rent support program, and the rent reductions actually come into effect.
so if we can, then let's follow up on that point. So if you're a small business owner, some sole proprietors don't qualify for the 40,000 because they don't hit the payroll amount. What is your advice for them, or is there another program they can look at?
Well, we're encouraging the government to actually recognize small companies. Some startups have that problem. There are any number of gaps here to build. But with regards to those companies that are afraid of taking on that $30,000 additional debt for the time when we emerge from the crisis, there is a suggestion that they should apply for the $40,000 now, put $30,000 in the bank, use the $10,000 which will be the forgivable part of that fund, and then maintain the $30,000 to repay when that time comes. But to use that $10,000 as the bridge. Yet for those smaller businesses that don't qualify, that's the work of the opposition to encourage the government. CFIB is certainly making that case as well.
Well, I would just say, I think that's very well said, and I would just say that on the $40,000, it's one of the best programs we've seen for those who qualify, and I would encourage you on behalf of all our members to continue to push on that and work with all the other levels of government and the other parties to ensure that if you are, as an example, you brought up some good examples, but if you're a sole proprietor or you have a few employees and you don't draw a salary or you don't have a large payroll, that you could still qualify, because ultimately, I think the vast majority of businesses, they're doing great things right now. They're trying to get through this together. They understand health is the priority, but they want to make sure they have a business to go back to. And I thought that the mayor's point, and he made it last week, about what a reasonable conversation should sound like between a landlord and a tenant right now. Like, what should that sound like? Because we need some give and take on both sides. So now I want to make sure, let's go into the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Sure. The CRA says, we understand it's going, the portal will open on Monday. The CRA will start taking applications. There's just still confusion because there's a lot of details on this. It's been evolving, I think, in a positive way. Can you just provide some further clarity as to your understanding of some of the guidelines? Who qualifies? What will the process feel like? When can people expect the payments?
Well, and you're right. There is a lot of confusion, and this has evolved. A lot of the questions that have come from the business sector has prompted the government to be more specific in who is covered and under what conditions. So under the emergency wage subsidy, all businesses, regardless of the number of employees, are covered by this. Individual employees are covered. Partnerships are covered. Not-for-profit organizations are covered, and charities are covered, as long as they can demonstrate that in the month of March, their gross revenues, as you mentioned earlier, have been reduced by at least 15%. And in the months of April and May, that they are reduced by 30%. Now, there's a balance here. All of these emergency funds are to ensure that, on one hand, individuals, employees are able to get through this unprecedented time, to pay the rent, to put food on the table, to take care of their family, but also to ensure that companies large and small survive the crisis. So the balance is going to be found here by those employers who are willing to take up the plan and restore 75% of the funding to their employees, up to a maximum of, I think, $847 a month. But they've got to balance that, because in some cases, the incentive of a laid-off employee to receive the CERB is going to be a consideration as to what the eventual weekly take-home pay is going to be. And then there's other considerations within the emergency wage subsidy with regards to employers continuing to collect and remit unemployment insurance, HST, all of these other, and there's a program there which is in development, and we haven't been given the details yet, of 100% coverage of those associated costs associated with employer and employee. So I think it's important, even though the portal only opens on Monday, and even though the funds are not going to be delivered for some weeks, it's important that people go into the CRA website now, and every day there is a freshening of the detail and the conditions and the various options, and there are a variety of options that companies can use to claim this emergency fund. And also there's a calculator that's already been set up to give an employer a feel for how it would work under the various scenarios that they may or may not choose to apply.
Okay, thank you. That does provide some clarity. Thank you for that. MVP Marto, I'm going to ask you a specific question we received from Canada's Wonderland. So I'm going to read it to you. It would be great to get an understanding of what a phased reopening plan would look like in terms of timelines, expectations, and guidelines. This is talking about like post-COVID, but the reality is, like we've all been saying, it's going to be a slow recovery. But to go on, for an operation the size of Canada's Wonderland, with thousands of seasonal staff and the complexity of our operation, there's going to be a significant lead time between when we can get back into the park to prepare for reopening and when we would actually be able to open to the public. And then, it sort of goes on, is there any guidance in terms of crowd sizes for a particular type of space? So we are envisioning a post-COVID-19 scenario, but I think it's a fair question in the broad scheme of there's a lot of sectors impacted, and we're looking at, can you give any guidelines as to what the province's strategy might be for bringing people back and helping with particular industries?
So we have a jobs and economic recovery team that's working on getting the economy back up and running. But we also have a Ministry of Tourism, Culture, Sports and Heritage, which is working closely with a few of my colleagues on how we can better support our incredible economy related to tourism. And Canada's Wonderland actually falls under that purview. And I brought it to their attention. I flagged it to them a couple of days ago, that it's a very big summer employer. And it's also something that people look forward to. So I want to mention that I noticed on Twitter just a few days ago that Canada's Wonderland had posted that if you bought a 2020 season's pass, it was going to be good for 2021 as well. And then a couple of days ago, they even posted the recipe for their funnel cake. So I'm not surprised that they're quite anxious to get up and running, and that many of my constituents are anxious to enjoy everything that Canada's Wonderland has to offer. It's right on the edge of my riding. It's actually in Minister Lecce's riding, Canada's Wonderland. They are across the street from the new Mackenzie Health Vaughan Hospital. And it's my understanding that they might be offering them some help with storing equipment and things like that. I had put the suggestion forward to the ministry to speak to them that perhaps they could do more than that. Perhaps they have, if their rides aren't going to be getting up and running and they have engineers that normally work on that, that maybe there's some jobs or some work for them on getting the Vaughan Hospital up and running quickly, and maybe providing some support and some services and some employees to help with that. Listen, there's a lot of discussion among all levels of government and the public in terms of how soon certain things are going to get up and running. Will the golf courses reopen is what I'm hearing from my husband and his friends. The Premier mentioned yesterday on his press conference that he was asked by his nephew, former Mayor Ford's son, will my summer camp be open this summer? I'm hearing, and I'm sure many of you are hearing from your friends and relatives and neighbors, as well as the residents that you represent. What's this summer going to look like? I think people have sort of accepted what the rest of the school year is looking like. And now they're looking on to hopefully some nice warm weather and what's going to be for the kids this summer. And all I can say is that we want to hear your suggestions. We want to hear suggestions from the public. We want to hear suggestions from the business owners and the community leaders, what they think that this summer and fall and the months following that are going to look like for all of our residents. And it's possible that somebody has the suggestion. I was talking to somebody who was concerned about the overnight camps. And, the suggestion came up, perhaps the staff, they normally go up a week early. Maybe the staff has to go up 2 weeks early and be quarantined and ensure that all the staff are safe before the kids are sent up. And this person actually made a joke and said, they used to check for lice before the kids got on the bus to go to camp. And now they're going to be checking their temperature and they're going to want to know that the kid is feeling okay. We know that the virus is more serious for older people, but it's still serious for anybody of any age, can be hit very, very hard with, we don't know long term what the physical damage is by the virus, but we know that there's damage to kidneys now. It's not just affecting the lungs, it seems to affect a lot of the organs. So I think that we have to tread cautiously.
I'm gonna turn to the mayor because I have a related question, which is which sectors, in particular in Vaughan, which sectors do you think are well positioned to emerge stronger after the crisis has abated?
Look, I think we have a lot of sectors that will bounce back. I mean, as you know, private construction has been partially frozen. But you also know the construction, the plastics industries, logistics. Just think about logistics, for example, how important that is to our city to transport goods to and fro. I think that construction will come back because there's a pent up. The reality is 150 to 175,000 people move into the Greater Toronto area every year. This is just migration patterns, and they need housing. And housing, there's still a pent-up demand for housing, so that will bounce back. I also think, as I said, logistics will do very well as well. So overall, I think because we are a very entrepreneurial community, a part and parcel of being an entrepreneur, as your members would know, is the ability to bounce back from adversity. I mean, we've had recessions, in historical terms, we had depressions. The DNA of a small business person is precisely that. It's the ability to tough it out during tough times. But the responsibility of government, as it's been demonstrated throughout COVID-19, is to be there to also help. I want to, if I may, follow up on that question you asked, Gila. I just want you to know that a few weeks ago, I instructed my team that we would not have a Canada Day celebration as we normally do. And I know that Peter and Gila participate every year. The reason being that the last thing you want to do is get back into normalcy when it's not really normal, and have a major setback, because that would be very, very discouraging. So having 10,000 people at celebrating Canada Day, and from there, the transmission of COVID-19 is not worth it. So I think we have to be disciplined. We have to be focused. Any kind of reopening in the economy has to be well thought out. And so there's a strategy for elderly, there for the young kids. But I just wanted to tell you where I'm at. The fact that I canceled the Canada Day celebration and have instructed to have a virtual celebration, which I understand the government of Canada is now doing as well, tells you something. I think it's going to be a slow process. But when there is, Brian, I think that when we're as small business people, when we go through periods like this, they're tough, but it also gives you a chance to reorient, to kind of understand the dynamics. And I've spoken to a lot of small business people who are, of course, frustrated. And I feel their frustration. I grew up in a small business family. I can tell you, it's tough. It's tough to meet the payroll. It's tough to just survive every day. But I do think that the ones that are going to survive through this will do it exceptionally well. We have to be optimistic. Realistically, you have to be a realist, but you have to be an optimist, because the being a pessimist is not going to work very well for anybody during these times.
That's true. Okay, what I'm going to try and do, just because I know we're running a bit short on time, I'm going to ask you each one more rapid question. We could go on for hours, but let's respect all your time. So I'm going to ask you one quick question each, and then I'll give you time to provide some concluding remarks. So I'm going to start with MPP Marto. We got a question from Brian Gersten from Thornhill. What steps will be taken to ensure social distancing remains in place once workplaces begin to reopen?
So I think, again, that we have to lead by example in terms of the government suggestions and programs. And we have to do our best. We're seeing a lot of businesses come up with innovative ways to provide curbside deliveries. I know I picked up curbside from Greco's from Concord Food Center just today. And I know Walmart and Instacart and all these types of apps that people are downloading, that they're providing, No Frills as well, that they're providing all kinds of services. So I think that the success going forward is anybody who's going to take their business model. I think that Brian is in real estate, if I'm not mistaken, that asked the question, that we're seeing a lot more virtual tours of properties. I think any business model going forward is going to have to take into account social distancing, safety, sterilization, things that maybe that business didn't really have to think too much about before. They're certainly going to have to focus on that. And I think that the businesses that are going to be successful going forward, perhaps new businesses, are the ones that are going to be focusing on digital services, on advising and consulting with the business community in how to maintain things like the social distancing or plexiglass panels to limit the spread of this virus that we're not going to see the end of anytime very soon. We're going to have to balance public safety, the risk factors with getting the economy moving. And I think Premier Ford said it best. He said it wasn't easy to shut down this economy, and it's going to be even harder to get it reopened.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to you, MP Kent. Because so many of the programs emerge at the federal government, we could go back and forth for 4 or 5 hours. But if I had one more question for you, it would be about the Canada Emergency Response Benefit in this sense. So the CERB. And we've had this from a number of contractors have asked us this. What steps do you believe the Canadian government should take to ensure that people who are ineligible for the CERB still receive government assistance? And I mean, it's not lost on me that you're with the official opposition and the parties are working well together, but we want to hear your thoughts on how do we support this area of the economy.
Well, again, there are any number of gaps in the CERB, just as we've seen them in the other emergency funding programs, and they're evolving. And the government is taking advice. As I said, we would like more daily real sessions of the House of Commons with reduced membership to encourage that widening of the benefits that are provided. But there are problems, and there's also, and it comes back for those that are not covered. For example, students were a very large, or those graduate students who were planning on entering new employment this year, but had no revenue earned in the past 12 months to qualify. They are now covered by this new $9 billion announced, the Student Emergency Fund announced today. So that's a major gap plugged. In the Canada Summer Jobs program this year, where new funds have been added, and we were asked in the last week to speak to Thornhill for-profit companies in the private sector looking for employment opportunities, again, for those that might be stuck between employment or lost income. They've expanded that Canada Summer Jobs program as far as February next year. So there's a widening. The gaps are being addressed far too slowly for folks that are in difficult situations, but they are being addressed, and I'm sure that the federal government, in cooperation with the province, is going to address those.
Well, and actually, I really appreciate you covering the Canada Summer Jobs program and the extension of that program, because it's something that I think a lot of our members haven't heard about. So what if I give you a bit of latitude? Do you want to go into a bit more detail as it might support some of our members?
Well, it does support some of the members in Vaughan and across York Region, and some of it with regards to conversion to manufacturing of PPE, the personal protective equipment that is still in such shortage across the province in hospitals and as well as in seniors' homes. So it is being addressed. The government will get back to us in the next 3 weeks with regards to which companies will qualify. And I'm sure that it will probably evolve between now and February next year at the end of the expanded period. So again, it's important for folks to keep their eye on all of the departmental websites. This is a Service Canada administered program, but also keep in touch with our office and for the postings on our MP page.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Mayor, we often say the level of government that people see and interact with the most is municipal. Can you give some examples of, there's been a lot done at the City of Vaughan to maintain continuity of government. Can you give some examples of functions and services that are operating, whether virtual or in person right now with the city, so that people at home who need support from the city know what's operating and can access those services?
Yeah, I mean, the domain vaughan.ca is very, very important these days. I think that we've moved a lot of things online. Even I was reviewing some of the activities that we've taken. We're talking about earlier about permits and developments. We've implemented a new process that accepts, reviews, and approves applications electronically. Just to give an example, since we're talking about the impact on business. But then, one of the things, because life goes on outside of the business community as well, people have families, and it's amazing that we have a library system where you can access books and videos and music in 60 different languages. Now there are classes being offered through community services and recreation. The library is very, very active. Bylaw department is very active on everything is more or less digitized throughout the city, which is I think this is not going to change after COVID-19. I think people are going to become so accustomed to dealing with government this way that you're going to notice a major paradigm shift. But I know that the business community, I've spoken to many members of the business community, particularly in the small business and development industry, and they are very, very happy and satisfied in the manner in which our departments have reacted to it. You know, we faced the challenge of what do you do with over 1,000 employees during this crisis, and you consider social distancing and everything else. Well, 80% of our planning department now works from home. You know, the same thing with our legal department. We've shifted all these things around, but one thing that we are noticing is that the productivity rate of employees is very high, and now all of a sudden we're asking ourselves, because we're working on this prior to COVID-19, if in fact the work at home option is the best. You know, it's really interesting, Brian. You notice how many cars are not on the roads? You know, you remember probably the last mayor's speech at your Vaughan Chamber of Commerce. I spoke about a big bang to deal with gridlock. Well, variable work hours and variable workspaces.
You did talk about that, yeah.
May actually be something that we should dig a little bit deeper on, because I will tell you, investing in major infrastructure costs a lot of money. And I do believe that cities need to be open 24/7. And this is one thing that I've been speaking about for a while now, is that COVID-19 is actually making us rethink all sorts of assumptions that we were making about the way we live and life in general.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I do remember you talking about variable work hours at the mayor's luncheon, and there's no question that they would, when we eventually get back to full recovery, whenever that is, they would certainly help to reduce traffic congestion. I was also on a call earlier this week, and businesses having some concern about, if we let employees work from home, will we lose loyalty? And I believe that our point is actually in many areas, it will actually increase loyalty. There are many people who appreciate the flexibility to be able to work from home sometime. There are people in society who struggle to get back into the workplace because there's a lack of flexibility sometimes with where they work. But I think there's a lot of positives that eventually I'm hoping we're going to see and lessons learned, but unfortunately we're a ways off from that. I was thinking, why don't we go to MPP Marteau for concluding remarks, and we'll go to the mayor, and then we'll let MP Kent conclude.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I just want to mention that my team's been hard at work answering the phone and emails, just as though they're in the office. We have a completely digital, paperless office. So it has not been, it's been business as usual. In fact, we've been busier than we've ever been because of all the government programs and all the information that people need. So I want to thank my team for all of their efforts, of course. We've also had an update, a COVID-19 update that we've been putting out every 2 or 3 days since this began, and you can sign up for that, and you can go to gila.ca through our website and send us your information if you'd like to receive that, or call or email our office. And also, since I'm the parliamentary assistant for French, I'll just say that nous effectuons une mise à jour du bulletin dans l'autre langue officielle en français pour la communauté francophone en Ontario. So we've also done an COVID-19 update in French. We've done a couple of them for the Francophone communities. So the key is communication, to be informed, and to focus on lowering the risk factors. Nobody can do everything perfectly 100% of the time, but you don't give up. You do the best you can do for yourself, for your friends, for your coworkers, for your employer, and for your entire neighborhood. So let's try to keep garbage and litter off the streets so that Mauricio Bevilacqua doesn't get phone calls to the city of Vaughan complaining about litter. We all sort of are very, very fortunate to live in such a great city and such a great province because we have so many opportunities to access the healthcare that we might need, access information from our officials. We're just really, really happy to hear from you, even if it's just to say, thanks, you're doing a great job. But mostly we're happy to hear your suggestions, your concerns, and your questions. So thanks, Brian.
No, thank you very much, and we will certainly forward you if there's comments that we'd like to share with the provincial government that are relevant to you. We'll send those to you as well. We'd love your feedback and your input. Okay, so we'll turn to the mayor for concluding remarks.
Brian, it's really with an attitude of gratitude that I say these final comments. To express gratitude to you, to my colleagues, to our essential workers, who have shown to be selfless individuals who give 150% to really appeal to the very best of what humanity has to offer. To the small business community, I want to also express my sincerest gratitude to you as well, because without you, the city of Vaughan would not have created 60,000 jobs over the past 8 to 10 years. There are a lot of things that we will learn from COVID-19, but it's very important in life when you're going through adversity to be strong, to dig deep. There will be government programs that will help you along, obviously, but from an existential point of view, it's very important to root yourself and anchor yourself to those values that help you get through tough parts of life sometimes. And nobody's immune to it. Everybody faces that one day or another. The small business community, though, I'm very proud of their resiliency, their indomitable spirit, their ability to believe in what they're doing. And that's how this great city was built. And they're very generous, very kind, and you see the way they've reacted to COVID-19. There are so many companies that are involved. They're either donating things or they're reaching out or they're doing all they can to bring about a positive change at a time when we all need it. So I want to say 2 words really embody all that I feel right at this moment, and those 2 words are thank you.
Well, thank you. And MP Kent, we'll pass it to you for last word.
Well, thank you, Brian, and certainly I echo Mayor Bevilacqua's optimism and determination, as Gila has expressed as well. And I'd just like to say that my constituency office stands ready to assist in any areas of concern with regard to the federal level of government. From still stranded, we still have significant number of stranded citizens far and away, which the government is still attempting in most cases to return home. But with regards to the business community and this variety of funding programs, my staff stands ready to respond and assist and perhaps offer some interpretation of still developing programs. And I've got to say, we have never been busier in the 12 years that I've been representing the constituency of Thornhill. And we really are in a virtual state. For folks that may have dropped by our office at Clark and Yonge, they may have discovered it no longer exists. We've been caught. We are truly virtual. Our entire office is in a sealed container, having moved at the end of our lease at Clark and Yonge, waiting for the completion of our new office just around the corner from Gila's office on Center Street. So big thanks to Judith, to Braden, to Beverly, to Perry Ann, to Michael in Ottawa, and again, for any advice or assistance, please continue to contact the office, and we'll do our best to assist. And just let me conclude by saying thanks to you, Brian, thanks to the Chamber, and to all of its members, and to Eka, Gila, and Maurizio. We will survive, and we will emerge from this, and we will be strong and resilient, and we will prosper once again. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you've all been just like our two previous town halls, you've all been very gracious with your time, very transparent. I appreciate the optimism. It's more of a glass half full approach, of course. At the Chamber, we acknowledge how quickly government is working right now together. You're introducing programs at all levels at a speed that's really unheard of. And really making it a nonpartisan environment. And it's gracious of you to come on and our members do appreciate this. Try and provide some clarity and some support moving forward, which you have. So I just encourage you to continue to be supportive that way. I'd encourage our members to reach out to you, to all of you. You've been great about offering that. We should stay united. At the Vaughan Chamber, as I said from the outset, we've talked to over 400 of you. It's probably at 450 now. Personally, we're hearing your concerns. We're sharing that with all levels of government, privately, publicly, through town halls. We found them very receptive. We've seen changes implemented. And again, I want to thank MP Kent, MPP Marto, and Honourable Mayor Maurizio Bevilacqua, City of Vaughan, for taking the time with us today, and we will keep the communication lines open. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.